Now, this excreted package of poisons is not only an incredible miracle of Mother Nature to detoxify, a wonderful strategy, but it serves as a communication vehicle that is being sent out to the world itself through a kind of, the word that comes to mind is a resonance. I was just asked the other day by someone new to us if I was the Forbidden Doctor. Well, of course I said no. The Forbidden Doctor is not me at all.
We are not the Forbidden Doctor. Jack is not the Forbidden Doctor. It's in you.
The Forbidden Doctor is that magical, mystical power inside of you that is controlling and healing
It's that beautiful, marvelous, almost miraculous force that controls all healing.
It's that innate intelligence, that life force-directed influence that triggered your DNA to guide the building of your body after conception.
Yeah, it's that power that sustains your life, repairs your wounds and lesions, and it never stops working. It's that essential part of you that keeps you alive and heals your every hurt.
This is the Forbidden Doctor. It's not me. It's that part of you the powers that be have decreed forbidden to ever learn about or even consider, and never ever rely upon. For it is forbidden that you even know this life force exists at all.
You are your own Forbidden Doctor.
Yes. Hey everyone, this is Dr. Jack, and this week's podcast is from my local radio show in Salt Lake City. Mary will join me soon for our regular podcast format. I hope you enjoy this. Hey, good morning, everybody. 8 minutes after the top of the hour, you're listening to the Jack Stockwell radio talk show program. Today, the doctor's in, and oh my goodness, all these I don't even know where to begin. All these things that I want to talk to you about today, and that I think are somewhat accelerated moving into the election process that we're facing right now. But where to begin? Where to start with this? There is so much to talk about. I want to still talk about the lockdown and the masks, and because, and I think I probably have mentioned this on shows in the past, there are basically two kinds of people that I run across. And I think I've only been able to ascertain this from a clinical perspective, seeing people in a healthcare clinical situation all week long. And people who are coming in because they're worried, they're scared, they're in pain. There's some nutritional things that needed to be addressed. Just, oh my goodness, just the number, a person with a severe tic, just almost debilitating. Another one with bad seizure problems. Another one with nothing more than just a back pain that stopped him from working. And the list goes on and on. But as I talk to these people, as I said, basically they break down into two groups. Those that are running scared with their tail between their legs because they don't listen, look at, review, examine, research anything more than the evening news. And those that actually reach out and start researching and spend some time in the scientific documents. Because I get a kick out of certain candidates who say, we trust science, when what is being presented in the evening news as science could not be further from. And there is so much information available that you can go online and find this stuff yourself. You can go to the archives at the CDC. You can specify a date and read publications. They have a magazine that comes out every month, one of several, Emerging Infectious Diseases, where they present the papers that their people have presented to the world that got published in Emerging Infectious Diseases. Not a bad magazine in the sense of lack of notoriety. And There's the NIH that has publications. And then you can also go to PubMed. You can go to Medline. These are, you just put whatever you're looking for in the search bar, and all of this research starts popping up. And a lot of it very, very recent material, especially CDC publications. You can go to the National Health Service in the UK and start reading their stuff. And if you're into German or French, you can, or Italian, you can go to their health service outfits. And some of it is translated in English, some of it isn't. But between the National Health Service in the UK and the CDC in the United States, you can spend all week long on one or two different subjects. But you can come away with it understanding what the latest science is telling you. You know what? That's what I think I want to concentrate on here in this first segment. Just this idea just came. That the thing I want to hit. And you have heard me talk about, in the past, the germ theory. And you've heard me talk about Koch's postulates. And you've heard me talk about Pasteur's ideas of the germ theory. And you've also heard me refer to something called exosomes. And if you, it's spelled just like it sounds, EXOSOMES. Just go Google exosomes and start reading. And a very important piece of research that was published, I think it was May of this year, in a journal that, interestingly enough, is called Viruses. Not Mad Magazine, not People Magazine, but Viruses, a peer-reviewed journal in May of this year. And the title of it is The Role of Extracellular Vesicles as Allies of HIV, HCV, and SARS Viruses. Now, I'll explain what that means here in a second. But when I read this, I about fell out of my chair. This is really, really significant. Now, to explain what this means, because you're not going to hear this on Fox, you're not going to hear it on CNN, MSNBC, any of the regular programming. And I'm not saying that to disparage Fox News or MSNBC or whatever. You have far right and far left news reporting going on all the time that is paid for. Don't let that escape your attention. These daily talk shows, even if they sing to your heart, whether it's CNN or Fox, these are paid for programming. And there's an awful lot on there on either station. And I watch one more than the other, but I do watch the other from time to time. And it doesn't make any difference. They still come out with stuff that just, I cringe when I hear it because it smacks up against real science. Now, with that having been said, in the world of science, so-called science, but I put little quotes on that word, beliefs typically die a long, slow death. Even when the science of the moment smacks up against it. Some ideas in healthcare, some ideas in science. Let me turn off my little alarm here. Are hard to get rid of because it gets so ingrained in cultural thinking. Now, at the time that the main proponents of the germ theory, and we've talked about this, the Frenchman Pasteur, the German Koch, just ardently believed in the bacteria, that all bacteria, all of it, in living organisms, including human beings, were invaders from the outside. In other words, from our skin inward, we were sterile, we were clean, we were pure. There was no bacteria inside of us, except if we had been invaded by a pathogen. And today, 150 years later, this idea seems, well, I laugh at it because almost everyone now knows that trillions of bacteria live inside of us on every surface of our bodies, in every orifice of our bodies. And there are people who have attempted to demonstrate that most of the genetic material is bacterial and viral rather than human in origin. Yes, most of your DNA is not human. And there are studies out there that show of the entire separate DNA string inside the nucleus of the cells of your body, only about 20% of that DNA is necessary to build you. And that you only have about 20,000 genes. The human genome is made up of about 20,000 genes, where the fruit fly has 60,000 genes. Yeah, 3 times as many. Now, in the DNA, only 20% of your DNA is necessary to make you. Where's this 80% coming from? The more they study it, the more bacterial it is. And it's not just that. We have this evidence that these trillions and trillions of bacteria, more bacteria cell by cell than the cells of your body, living in the gut, living in the sinus mucosa, the sinus cavities, living in your armpit, in your crotch, in your ear, on your scalp, all throughout, under your nails, all throughout your entire body. Living in us, on us, help to digest our food. They synthesize crucial nutrients. They participate in detoxification functions. They regulate and control even our emotions because they have an awful lot to do with neurotransmitter formation in the gut. And in some ways, they completely participate in every normal human function. We could not live without them. They could not live without us. And so the early proponents of the germ theory, weren't completely inaccurate in their conclusions about the role of bacteria in the human organism. But aside from that, but more important than that, they established a framework that, and this is where it kind of departed from the truth, they postulated that human beings were somehow separate from the rest of nature. Not that we were just the top of the food chain, but somehow we were separate, special beings on this planet. And this very insidious, very unscientific conclusion still continues to this day. And it causes grave harm in the medical world because we see ourselves apart from the community of all the microbes around us rather than seeing us a part of it. Now, in the case of viruses, and this is, there's a shift that is beginning to take place in the scientific community. And that's the thing I got excited about here a second ago, because the old paradigm about viruses is that we're virus-free. We want you to be virus-free. Then you can enjoy a healthy, natural state of being. And the only viruses that are inside of you, if there are some, they have to be pathogenic. And they came from outside of you. The virus that would not die. The virus that roams the night. The virus that waits under your doorstep. Down in the basement, waiting to get you. This belief, of course, and this is critical to understand, has never been proven. It has just been stated as dogma. And it kind of dovetails into the prevailing notions and theories that somehow nature is out to get you. When you go into the woods, be sure you got bear spray. Now, if you fast forward from Koch and Pasteur up to modern virology, we now know that these particles called viruses can be exosomes. E-X-O-S-O-M-E-S. You read that, go read it for yourself. They're also referred to as extracellular vesicles. Now, if you've ever seen a child with chicken pox, you see all the little blisters on them. That's a vesicle. The medical term is vesicle, not necessarily a blister. It's a raising up of the surface of the skin that contains some kind of a fluid. If you pop it, fluid will come out of it. Now, what modern, up-to-date, that's not getting evening news coverage is saying that these, what are considered to be viruses, are these exosomes, these little extracellular vesicles which are generated from the tissue itself as a way of detoxifying what is inside the cell and communicating with other cells. And I got a great research report to quote here in just a moment. Don't go away. 24 minutes after the top of the hour, you're listening to the Jack Stockwell Radio Talk Show program, and the doctor's in. A very special is going on at the clinic right now, 15% off. We occasionally do a 15% sale in celebration of a very important birthday tomorrow. I won't tell you who. All right, it's my birthday tomorrow. And Rourke's. Rourke is going to be 21 years old today. That's tomorrow. That's Mary's and my son. And those of you who were listening to my regular daily show from the time he was born in 1999, talked about him on the air all the time. And some of you, even to this day, I will be taking care of somebody I've been taking care of for 20 years. And haven't seen him for 2 or 3 years. They feel like they need to come in. We sit down and talk for a second. And by the way, how's Rourke doing? They'll ask me questions like that. It's really nice that connection is there. So he turns 21 tomorrow, and I turn 70. All right, there it is. I said it. Oh, geez. I might as well just have told you tomorrow I'm going to officially start speaking Mandarin. That makes more sense to me than to tell you that I'm 70. My goodness. Anyway, the birthday's tomorrow to celebrate 15% off of everything of a supplement nature through Sunday midnight. All right, let me get back to what I'm talking about. To get the 15%, you go to forbiddendoctor.com, and you can call the office and do that kind of stuff, but it's a lot easier if you just go to forbiddendoctor.com, search the products you're looking for. When you check out under code Jack B Day, Jack B Day is the code to get a 15% discount. And then the office number, in case you get lost in all this process, 801-523-1890. So I want to get back to these little EVs, these little extracellular vesicles, virologists are calling them. Some other virologists are calling them exosomes. They're not living. They have tiny little itty-bitty snippets of RNA in them. Some of them have little tiny snippets of an incomplete DNA structure. And this is where the viral theory jumped track back in the 1930s. Because once they had electron microscopy and began to see these things, because they could never see them before, they're 1,000 times smaller than a cell. And the average cell in the body requires about 400 power on a microscope, optical microscope, 400 power to get a good clear picture, even using staining. You need a lot of power to see the finest details of a living cell. These viral elements, these exosomes, are 1,000 times smaller than that, which is why they could never see them until they had the electron microscope. They don't move. So a lot of theories came about. And they don't breathe. There's no respiration going on. There isn't stuff going in. There isn't stuff going out so much that there were always debates whether they were alive or not. And those debates continue to this day because they do not replicate themselves. They just show up. When do they show up? Well, it works this way. When a certain tissue is exposed to certain kinds of toxins, especially a toxin that breaks down the genetic material inside the living cell, such as EMF poisoning, such as 5G radiation, has been shown to disrupt DNA replication inside a living cell. These little tissue packages of this broken down genetic material inside the cell have to be gotten rid of right away. So they get packaged up into these tiny little vesicles so they can be excreted out of the body itself, out of the cell, out of the body. This is what has been referred to, it's a detoxification system of the cell itself. One person I've heard it referred to as the body's way of pooping out poisons. Now, this excreted package of poisons is not only an incredible miracle of Mother Nature to detoxify, a wonderful strategy, but it serves as a communication vehicle that is being sent out to the world itself through a kind of, the word that comes to mind is a resonance. Everything has a resonance. I mean, in a macro sense, my voice right now is resonating, but down to a micro level, cells have a resonance, whether it's the leaf of an oak tree or a neuron in your brain. They have a certain resonance that they vibrate at. And so these exosomes, these extracellular vesicles, these EVs, come out of the cell to communicate with one part of the body to another, or to form from one organism to a community of friends, that a poison has been encountered. So start defensive posturing. Start setting up offsetting strategies inside of you. Marshal the immune system, whatever else. I've said this on radio shows in the past. If you're in a room by yourself and somebody comes walking in who has a bacterial infection taking place, and what I'm saying about viruses is not what I'm saying about bacteria. Bacteria are totally different. And they have bacterial pneumonia. They may not even know it yet, or maybe they've got a mild symptom of it. They only have to get within 3 feet of you. And they're breathing out these exosomes. You can't escape them. I've seen numbers 10 to the 31st power of these exosomes, these viral elements, these extracellular vesicles in the atmosphere of the Earth. 10 to the 31st power. 10 to the 31st power of these things in the dirt of the Earth. 10 to the 31st power of these things in the oceans of the Earth, and the lakes, and the streams, and the pond. That's more than the stars of the known universe, of which there are a billion galaxies or more right now. That's an impossible to comprehend number. And so, when poison has been encountered, the body has to start detoxifying itself, because that poison, and it may not just be 5G radiation, it could just be glyphosate in your food. It could be heavy particulate matter in the atmosphere from some disposal process somewhere, or some smokestack somewhere that does not have proper scrubbers inside the pipes, the smokestacks, to clean up the air before it gets out, and to be downwind of that. It could be poisons, polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, that leak into the local water supply, as we've seen with Aaron Brockovich story and things like that end up causing damage to the cells, and the cells have to start detoxifying themselves. So you get a plethora of these little extracellular vesicles coming out of the cell, filling up the area around the cell. Now, when you do a scanning electron microscope picture of this stuff, the energy that is generated in the wave that passes over this stuff to get an electron microscope picture is going to kill anything in its pathway. That's why even the cell itself, you can't look at living cells under an electron microscope. You can under an optical microscope. And so these things are, in one particular case, they're not there, then all of a sudden they're everywhere. And so the theory that developed was that this was some viral infection that took place, and these viruses, only having an itty-bitty form of RNA strand inside of them, has been assumed that somehow they get inside the cell, and then they rewire with that little tiny strand the major strands of DNA inside that cell to turn that cell into a manufacturing plant to make more of these things, because for Pete's sake, everybody, look, they're everywhere. And the analogy I used last time was that that's like blaming the burning house on the firemen, because the firemen are everywhere at the scene of the crime. The firemen must have done this. Now, unfortunately, the medical scientific community has mistaken these detoxification communication messengers for pathogenic viruses. But that narrative is starting to crumble. So I got a quote here from you from the journal Viruses, May of this year. The paper was written by a Dr. Giannessi et al., all the other doctors that are involved in this research project, titled "The Role of Extracellular Vesicles," or the role of exosomes, or the role of what we thought are viruses, as allies of HIV and SARS viruses. Now here's a quote from Section 3 of that paper. "The remarkable resemblance between EVs, extracellular vesicles, these little things that are coming out of the cell, and viruses has caused quite a few problems in the studies on the analysis of EVs released during viral infections. Nowadays, it's an almost impossible mission to separate EVs and viruses by means of canonical vesicle isolation methods, such as differential ultracentrifugation, because they are frequently co-pelleted due to their similar dimension. In other words, what we think here are viruses and what we see as EVs coming out of the cell can be co-packaged because they're of the same size, same shape." Those are my words. The quote continues, "To overcome this problem, different studies have proposed the separation of EVs from virus particles by exploiting their different migration velocity in a density gradient, or using the presence of specific markers that distinguish viruses from EVs. However, to date, a reliable method that can actually guarantee a complete separation does not exist." Now I want to repeat that last line. However, to date, a reliable method that can actually guarantee a complete separation does not exist. What does that mean? It means a way to distinguish external pathogenic viruses from particles generated from our own tissues that help us to adapt to a novel toxin does not exist, period. That's May of this year. Now, perhaps the reason why virologists can't find any method to distinguish these particles from each other, in spite of the fact that they can pull a single molecule out of virtually any complex solution, can only be because there's nothing to distinguish. So, I want to go on record here, October 28, 2020, that all these viruses that the world has been so upset about for the last several decades, and to this day they have not made one RNA-based virus vaccine that actually works, and this is why they don't work. All viruses are exosomes. All viruses are extracellular vesicles. They have the cart before the horse. You don't get the virus, it replicates inside your cells, and suddenly you've got all these extra things. You were first poisoned, coupled with malnutrition, causes the death or destruction or the breakdown of genetic material inside the cell, and the cell is detoxifying itself by encapsulating these broken DNA segments, wrapping them up so they're little pieces of RNA, and pooping them out of the cell. And the sicker you are, the more plentiful these things are. They're all generated from our tissues. Not a single one of them are pathogenic. So, what does that mean? Well, it's time to get down to some real honest work. And that's not me. I'm not making this up. I'm getting this from Virus magazine, a peer-reviewed journal, published May of this year. This may explain why in emerging infectious diseases, a publication of the CDC that you will not hear on the evening news, page 39 of the July issue, which there seems to be some evidence it may be a reprint from May of this year, February of this year. Page 39. We can't identify what this thing is. We've purified, filtered, and there's nothing there. We can't identify what this is. So the PCR tests that we're having over 1,000 of them a day in Utah are based on something they can't identify or know what it is. It's assumed that it is this. It is assumed that it's SARS-CoV-2 that creates COVID-19 disease. Now, how long will it take before this change in how we view viruses, exosomes, will happen? You're probably going to have the old guard die off first. Paradigms are very, very hard to change. I've often said this in my show in the past, especially on Philosophical Fridays with Paul. The hardest thing for anybody to do is to be able to let go of something they once believed was true. We'll be right back. All right, it's 44 minutes after the top of the hour. You're listening to the Jack Stockwell radio talk show program, The Doctor Is In. So, as I was saying there, these things are just generated from our own tissues. It's the body's detoxification system. But when you get great marketers like Louis Pasteur, who is more of a businessman than he was a research scientist, and you even read his diaries that he made sure no one would ever get a chance to open up his research journals and diaries, but a member of his family put him on the market for money. He says, I could never take some infective material from an animal and put it in another animal and make that animal sick. I never could do it unless I first made the second animal sick ahead of time and then put this purulent material into him and it would grow. You had to poison them first. And that's the condition with the human being today. We always talk about the strength and the power of the immune system, which is true enough in and of itself. I mean, there's no issue about that. Compromised immune systems are sitting ducks for not viral invasions. Bacterial invasions can certainly take place, but not viral invasions. But compromised immune systems can lead to tissue sickness, and then the microbes show up in the sense of bacteria that's in there anyway. Your body is full of bacteria, and some of it very noxious, very dangerous bacteria, but the health of your body keeps it at bay. It's only when something decreases your own immune responses, like comorbidity problems, the reactions, the bad reactions to vaccinations, the standard American diet, poisoned water, poisoned air, poisoned food. And I don't mean you sit down and you eat a salad and then you fall over dead. But you sit down and eat a salad that came from a commercial farm that was sprayed with glyphosate that interrupts over, I can't remember if it's 300 or 600. It's at least 300 enzyme actions inside the body. Sickness is going to eventually show up. Then when the tissues get sick, the bugs show up to clean up the tissues just as much as flies and rats show up in a dirty alleyway. Roaches show up. Flies show up. So, Rourke is always kidding about how the boomers have to die off so that their crazy ideas can be pushed aside and make room for the new ideas. And I thought, well, okay, I probably had that crazy idea myself when I was a kid. But Paradigms, as I was saying before the break, are very hard to change. But the current paradigm regarding viruses is threatening to destroy this planet, and we don't have time for the virologists to fade away. They just have to start reading the research. At ForbiddenDoctor.com, top right search bar, podcast, put in podcast 200. The germ theory of disease is not true, and I go into that in much greater length than I've had time to get here in the last 50 minutes. But we have to understand this shift ourselves. You have to understand this for you and for your family. You have to clean up the water. You have to clean up the food, because that's where disease comes from. It doesn't come from germs and viruses. The germs and viruses show up after the exosomes, I should say. The germs and exosomes, the germs and extracellular vesicles that we call viruses, show up after the breakdown of tissue has first started, just as much as the pain doesn't show up until after you hit your thumb with the hammer. It's that simple, and it's obvious. It's not that complicated once you see what's behind that curtain. It's not that complicated once you remove the veil. It's very obvious. We humans are a part of all the community of life on this planet. We are a part of the joyous dance of life. And viruses and bacteria are our most intimate dance partners. And without them, you're just going to end up tripping over your feet and falling flat on our collective face. Dr. McBride, I don't know. I don't remember how long ago Mary and I started listening to Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, and the author of the GAPS concept. It's got to be at least a decade. And she was always talking about how we live in a community of these viruses and bacteria and everything else that surrounds us, inside of us, all over us. A cooperation, I think, is the word she used. We live in a cooperation. We provide them with moisture and food and warmth and oxygen, and they provide us with so many things, not the least of which are the whole litany of B vitamins, neurotransmitters, important enzymes, and all kinds of things we haven't even discovered yet. But there's no money in that. Have you noticed that? There's no real money in that because you can't scare people with that. People go, oh, you mean all I got to do is get a little bit better sleep, drink cleaner water, get a little bit of exercise, and improve my diet? Yeah. That's it. Now, if some of you are kind of wondering where you are on that spectrum, we have a way to help you. It doesn't cost you anything. The symptom survey at ForbiddenDoctor.com, right there on the landing page. You'll see off to the right side. Take the free symptom survey. Mary and I and Ambrosia did several of them last week. I think we might be up to date. I'm not sure. But I know what some of you are thinking at this point. Jack, people are sick all over the place. People are dying of COVID. There's, 220,000 deaths in this country alone now? Apparently 1 million or something over 1 million worldwide deaths from COVID. That sounds like a big number, doesn't it? 1 million people dead from all of these things? Well, it all depends on it all depends on how you look at it. Anytime you take anything out of context, it's really rather meaningless. And for any number to have some kind of meaning, you have to compare it to other things. So, is 1.2 million deaths a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's got to be bad things. As President Trump was saying the other night, just one death is unacceptable. But that's kind of Pollyanna. Nothing against Trump. It's just some other people think the same way. We can't allow one person to die from this. Can we not allow people to die from influenza? Can we allow people to not die from pneumonia? It's not so much the method of death, it's that we are so afraid of death. We see a terminal aspect to our existence by death, when death is just another birth. And so there's some numbers that are not being considered, and it just irritates me to no end when I hear the daily reports in Utah. Here we got 1,058 cases and 2 deaths. Because they're not looking at the infectious fatality rate. They look at case fatality rates. And the case does not have to be seropositive. In other words, you can have somebody declare that a COVID death is a COVID death because of the similarity of symptoms and the fact that we picked up this little tiny RNA snippet in a PCR test based on something the CDC, as recently as July, says we can't identify. We're not even sure it exists yet. I mean, it destroys the whole cascade. Infectious fatality rates is where you had seropositive. That means the blood, the serum. A blood test showed a predominance of what they consider to be COVID, SARS-CoV-2 virus, a proliferation of that inside somebody that died, of which they say there's only really 6% of all the deaths they can actually ascribe to pure COVID-19 disease. The other 96% or 94% are the result of comorbidities, that these people died with it rather than of it. But they won't go into the infectious fatality. They first started talking back in February about infectious fatality rates, even Fauci was, till they realized the numbers were too small. So they had to go to case fatality rates. And then if you look at, the excess mortality that was existing in March and April, and, like every other metric that they were trying to use about coronavirus at the time, there's a point where you get a little bit of a rise and then it drops off. As the CDC death rates published by the CDC show, the second week in April, it started dramatically decreasing. I'm looking here at the number, and I always like using Sweden because Sweden didn't have a lockdown. And so they were using the absolute death rate as opposed to the infectious death rate. Absolute death rate is the death rate of all causes, for every reason. Somebody hit you in the head with a hammer. You fell off the ladder, your car accidents, cancer. And the death rate so far in Sweden, where they had no lockdown, is actually less than it was last year before there was any COVID nonsense. I'm looking at a chart here from, it's published by Sweden, and their death rates from 2010, that was up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down till 2018. 2019 dropped off. Then 2020 dropped off considerably in the midst of COVID. Now, people die every day. We're not going to get away from that. That's part of the human experience. And when you start looking at death rates from like tuberculosis, 1.4 million deaths last year in the United States of tuberculosis. We've got a little over 200,000 deaths this year so far of COVID. 5 times that of tuberculosis last year. And in here, one chart I'm looking at here, so far here in the United States, COVID death, 225,000. It's estimated that medical malpractice kills 250,000. What are you going to do about that number? It's more than the COVID death. And then an even bigger number, according to the WHO, is that alcohol abuse kills 3 million people every year. Because, and then if you add in mental illness, domestic violence, child abuse, depression, suicide that's caused by the lockdowns, those numbers get even bigger. So are we going to put a global ban on tuberculosis? Are we going to put a global ban on alcohol? Why don't we just stop all alcohol? You say 3 million lives a year in the United States from all, not just alcohol poisoning, but all the other things that alcohol leads to, not the least of which are auto accident. Should we just ban alcohol? Well, that isn't going to happen. And now you see more and more cases suddenly showing up. And if that's all you look at, that's certainly frightening enough, because there's these surges of COVID cases all over the place. Wear the mask, social distancing, and and I'm going to get into this more next hour, maybe the political aspect of it, because it's ruining lives to the point where you're actually having staged rebellions against this. And what happened, the police were tear gassing their own citizens in Italy who showed up to protest mask wearing. Will it get that bad here? Well, I hope not. But I still think it's going to take the death of the old guard before the new guard can stand against the wind. We'll be right back. I always was the voice of sense and sensibility, and still am, mind you. All right, so I want to go in a little different direction. Some of you may be familiar with the Great Barrington Declaration. It's a document that has been signed by, 30, 40, 50,000 physicians, scientists all around the planet. And here's a quote from one of the lines in it. Have great concerns about the damaging physical and mental health impacts of the prevailing COVID-19 policies. And I'm rather intrigued by this. And when I heard about it, I thought, maybe I should sign this. Maybe I should, demonstrate a little gumption here and sign this thing with all these other doctors and scientists. And very intrigued and hopeful about it when I heard about it, but I've got some very grave concerns. And I thought, all right, here's something where I can, put my name down and be counted as one of those standing up against these ridiculous policies. And to my disappointment, and I cannot do it. And while it is my probably naive assumption that the authors had the best of intentions when they put this Great Barrington document, you just Google it, the Great Barrington, just like it sounds, BARRINGTON Declaration, the Great Barrington Declaration. I can't support it. And for some very important reasons. Here is a quote from the Barrington. Current lockdown policies are producing devastating effects on short and long-term public health. The results, to name a few, include lower childhood vaccination rates and worsening cardiovascular disease outcomes. Now, devastating, of course. Let alone, the psychiatric harm caused by policies of these of masking, of course, are horrendous. But not by lowering childhood vaccination rates. I mean, lowering childhood vaccination rates enhances the health of these fortunate children whose vaccine schedules were delayed or truncated or whatever. So I don't agree with that. And in fact, this nearly total halt, and I'm getting this from the National Health Service in England, the total halt to well baby visits that was declared very early back in February in the UK by the National Health Service showed a significant decline in sudden infant death syndrome. And SIDS, of course, is a diagnosis that essentially says we're very sorry, but we don't know what killed your child. However, holistic doctors know what in all likelihood killed the child, which was an adverse vaccine reaction. And so the number of weekly childhood deaths, primarily from SIDS, and I'm looking at these stats here, dropped from 700 to 500 in just a few weeks. And the 700 weekly figure of SIDS deaths, or childhood deaths, that's terrible. through years and years of widespread infant vaccination suddenly dropped when the infant vaccination dropped. Does that mean what I'm trying to imply? I don't know, but it sure sounds like it. So the declaration, as far as I'm concerned, misses one of the most important lessons we could have learned from the COVID lockdown. I cannot sign a document that laments the decrease in pediatric vaccinations. Here's another one. Here's another statement in there I had problems with. We know that all populations will eventually reach herd immunity, the point at which the rate of new infections is stable. Well, humans are not herd animals in the first place. We don't walk around in herds. That term is often used. It's an epidemiological myth, and it doesn't really exist in humans. Community immunity, a very far different thing, does exist in humans. We can become immune as a community. Now, herd immunity is when the vulnerable members of a herd do not get a disease to which the majority of the herd is immune. That's the technical definition of herd immunity. The members of the herd are stable in their interactions with members and other herds, very sharply limited, so that the immunological status of a particular group can be predicted. Measles outbreak in this and mumps over here, and we know the population, and we know the community, social, cultural aspects, and we can pretty well predict what's going to happen or what's not going to happen. In fact, the genetic makeup of a herd is more similar, and the movements of that group are far different than some tightly defined herd, because of the fact that we just, how many of you right now are going to be 20 miles away from where you are before the day's over, and then back again where you are, and 2 or 3 different places? It's not like we're in a collective, localized, geographical definition. And so what you can do with animals, because we have fences, and we have stables, and we have corrals, and whatever. But those terms are often used with human beings. They don't apply. These predictable behaviors don't apply to us, because we're just, we're very social animals, and we're not herd-like at all. But we can achieve community immunity. And when a lot of us are exposed to a pathogen and it decreases in virulence simply as it spreads through the population, where a lot of people are asymptomatic or have extremely mild infections, as most people who are exposed to this COVID-19 thing seem to express. And that's how our species the human immune system deals with. That's how we survived the Black Plague. It's how we got through the Great Pox, the smallpox, the 1918 influenza epidemic. And so what this document is saying, we know that all populations will eventually reach herd immunity. Now, that's not how we get there, I don't believe. Another statement from the great Barrington here. We know that all populations will eventually reach herd immunity, the point at which the rate of new infections are stable, that can be assisted by a vaccine. Now, vaccination is never a beneficial health policy choice as far as I'm concerned. I mean, no major infectious disease was ever stopped by a vaccine. Now, the public health people, the National Health Service, the CDC, of course, will tell you the opposite. Your local county health people will tell you, well, that's how we stop smallpox. That's how we stop polio. If you look, and you can get this on the internet. You can go to the National Health Service in the UK and look at their infectious disease charts that go back, many, many decades. In fact, they go back many years. I mean, they go back more than 100 years, is what I'm trying to say. And the same thing with the CDC, that goes back at least 100 years. And look at the rates of whooping cough as they fell down from serious disease to almost nothing. At the same time, the vaccine showed up. In other words, there's a tremendous downward slope, and as the slope almost hits the bottom, suddenly there's a vaccine. Same thing with diphtheria. Same thing with measles. The same thing with scarlet fever, and there never was a vaccine for scarlet fever. Yet it's its infective death rate dropped precipitously, the same rate as all the others. Same thing with typhoid. There's no widespread vaccination for typhoid, yet it dropped off precipitously about the same time, about 100 years ago. Polio, the vaccine showed up there in the mid to late 50s, but by 53, 54, it was already 90% eradicated. But people keep trying to blame it on the vaccine was what got rid of polio. No, it was once they figured out what caused polio and cleaned it up, polio began to disappear. Then it had in the 40s, and then it had a reemergence in the 50s as soon as DDT became very popular to spray all over the place. Then suddenly we had another big outbreak of what was considered to be polio. There's a great book out there on polio called The Moth in the Iron Lung. The Moth in the Iron Lung. Marady by, I forget his first name, but Marady, Maready, I think it's what it is. You can get it on Amazon. And it talks about where polio came from and what it really was, just arsenic poisoning. And every time there was a massive outbreak of polio, it was preceded by 2 or 3 months prior to that of heavy arsenic spraying of the fruits and the vegetables and the animals that were consumed in the area where the outbreak occurred. It's just an incredible story. Then here's another example, another thing they say. By way of example, nursing homes should use staff with acquired immunity and perform frequent PCR testing of other staff and all visitors. Now, I don't understand this one. This is really kind of baffling. I don't understand how any humane healthcare system could expose the vulnerable to those who may be asymptomatic carriers, relying on testing that has been proven to have unaccepted levels of false positives. And so when you look at the complete unreliability both of the PCR and the antibody testing, you're just kind of waiting around breathlessly for some gene editing experimental vaccine and ask the life-altering decisions at that time based on tests with a disastrous accuracy score. I've seen false positive, some reports as high as 80%. What does that mean? That means out of 100 people, that 80% of those that were declared positive, 80% of them may be a completely false positive test. There's other reports out there that show that if you still have some aspects of previous coronavirus infections, even rhinoviruses cold viruses could end up showing a positive test, a PCR test for COVID. So you have to ask the question, why? Why is this going on? What the heck is taking place here? Why is this continuing on like this? And one of the things that gives me a little hope about Trump is he's beginning to distance himself from Fauci and Birx. He's beginning to distance himself from all these other people that had such a hard stance position of the lockdown, of the masks. Because I think if he gets reelected, and I don't want to get political here, just saying this as an assumption on my part, if he gets elected, he may reverse all of this back to a normal life. How many times has he said now, the cure can't be worse than the disease? Anyway, I just have some issues with the Great Barrington Declaration, and there's some of the points there. As somebody asked me about that in the office the other day. We do have patients who do a lot of research. And a lot of times they'll bring me in documents that they printed off that they thought I should see. In most cases, I should see them. And I appreciate my patients doing that. We'll be right back, 20 minutes after the hour. 24 minutes after the hour. You're listening to the Jack Stockwell radio talk show program. I want to get back in. I'm looking at, during the break there, I was listening to Boris Johnson and what he was telling the UK. Interesting character. How people like that. Nothing against him, but wasn't he an American? He's the Prime Minister of England? Anyway, I'm looking at some of the latest headlines coming out of Europe regarding COVID-19. And looking at what the French and the Germans are planning for new lockdowns. And let's see here. Boy, this is very interesting. Reuters is reporting that Emmanuel Macron, is preparing a stay-at-home order for the entire country for a week to try and contain the virus, as France says here cements its space as the worst hit of Europe's biggest economy. Imagine that happening here, that there's just this massive decree that's given out that all American citizens and non-citizens, for that matter, have to stay home for an entire week to try and contain this virus. Now, if there's any truth to what I talked about during the first hour, that these are exosomes as the body's trying to detoxify itself of poisons, and the poisoning continues, will a lockdown order to stay at home make any difference at all? If what I said during the first hour, even partially true, would not cleaning up the water you drink, and that means don't drink your tap water. Find some way to purify the water you're drinking. Get clean water. Water that does not have fluoride that poisons you, chlorine that poisons and kills the bacteria in your gut, pharmaceutical byproducts, various types of pesticides and herbicides that still manage to get into the drinking water supply. Get rid of the bacterial sprays, the antibacterial sprays that actually will go, if you get them on you, or this stuff in the Purell stuff and all this, you think it just cleans your skin? Your skin is not a barrier. It is a sponge. Whatever you put on your hands is going to go right through. Now, if you have been doing something terribly anti-hygienic and you've been soaking your hands in it for a while, yeah, I can understand a little purification treatment there after you washed your hands with hot water and soap for a few minutes. You know, like changing a baby's diaper. In fact, that's one of the that's one reason. I remember that from it was infectious disease class when I was in school. How the first case of polio occurred in Iowa after years and years of no polio. And what it was a farmer, a middle-aged farmer who came down with polio. And the health department just went crazy trying to figure out how that possibly could have happened. And, polio follows what's called the oral fecal route. You first get exposed to whatever is causing polio, then it has to go through your digestive system, ends up in your poop, and then it has to come back around through the mouth. It doesn't mean that you're, a scatophagia is going on. I don't mean that. But what they found out with this farmer was that his wife was a nurse. And as a nurse, felt it incumbent upon her to make sure that their new little baby that showed up as a bit of a surprise got a polio vaccine. Well, it's there in the baby, ends up in the baby's poop. And the father, the farmer, wasn't quite as hygienic as he ought to be, changing his baby's diaper, and ended up contracting polio. And after Iowa had gone like 18, 19, 20 years, something like that, without a case of polio. And they were able to identify it was tied back to the vaccine and anti-hygienic procedures on the part of the father. I mention that because it was the vaccine that caused the disease. Now, suppose we get an order like that in this country to stay at home for an entire week, so we got to contain this thing, when, if anything I said during the first hour was true, that is the ultimate cart before the horse. We want to clean up the water. You want to try to eat your food as organic as you possibly can. Organic food in America still means something. Now, I was in the store last night looking for organic blueberries. The only organic blueberries I could find were from Chile. But they were still marked organic, so I got them. Now, we get a lot of food from Chile. And I'm going to do some investigation on that to make sure that they're export there and our import here is watching that stuff closely, because there are foods that come from other countries you have to be very careful of, especially China. So Macron is expected to make some televised address sometime today, and he may already have done it. And the insiders, I'm looking at the Reuters thing here, are saying that they expect the lockdown to be similar to the measures that he imposed on the French people back in spring. And the main difference is that the government intends to keep the schools open, but lock down everybody else. Now, it wasn't very clear that they said how that was going to happen. I mean, it's too bad they didn't follow Biden's plan and impose lockdowns back in... Oh, wait a second. I think they did. So here is another... France preparing for a nationwide stay-at-home order. They should have listened to the science in January and followed the Biden plan. Oh, yes, of course. So, U.S. stocks. Have you been following that lately? Just rattled by this resurgence of the COVID-19 cases that are taking place. J.P. Morgan, I'm looking at their latest weekly update on their what's called the instant economic indicators. And it's showing a glimpse of the economy in real time, and holy smoke, it is just all over the place when these kinds of talks show up. Now, this is from Germany, from the Bild, B-I-L-D, the Bild newspaper, that after speaking with the local leaders from around the country, Merkel has decided to move ahead with a temporary national lockdown, although schools will continue to hold classes. See, this is the thing that always got me about... They want to make sure that 85% of or 90% of the children in the local school are vaccinated, so that we can protect these kids and they don't have to worry about anything else, being exposed to anything else. But the teachers aren't having a 95% vaccination rate. Their parents don't have a 95% vaccination rate. People in their communities, adults and other people, don't have a 95% vaccination rate. How in the world would that ever achieve this epidemiological, mythological herd immunity thing? And so here they're saying, well, we're going to lock down the adults, but we'll let the kids go to school. And then you've got this crazy idea that somehow these kids that are completely non-infectious are just terrible carriers, and they're going to hurt the teachers. So you have lockdown of parents in there. You see how you follow the logic of this thing? It breaks down really quick. So I'm quoting here. Following discussions with the prime ministers of the federal states about further restrictions, Chancellor Angela Merkel will inform the parliamentary group in the German Bundestag about the resolutions. This was announced by the deputy government spokesperson on Thursday morning. Merkel will make a government statement about the coronavirus in the Bundestag. So here are the details of the law. Here, it's going to focus on closing bars, closing restaurants, all public events to slow the second wave of the virus. Here it comes, folks. Now, the big issue here, of course, is the election next Tuesday. And depending on who wins next Tuesday, you're going to find out whether the cure is worse than the disease. So it says here, shops will stay open with restricted hours. Schools will only close in parts of the country where the numbers are particularly high. It doesn't say what the numbers are. I mean, to be sure, Germany's situation is probably the most mild out of the major European economies, but so we expect to hear more today from EU leaders who are holding a virtual bloc-wide meeting with leaders to discuss potential EU-wide measures to combat the virus. What is going on here? I mean, the drumbeat that is coming out of these European economies where they're not looking at these massive... I haven't been watching European news nearly as much as I used to do with The Daily Show. But other than the Brexit kind of thing that's going on, about the only issue I've seen as far as the EU is concerned is this resurgence, this second wave that's taking place of this COVID-19 thing. And so when you look at these countries, and especially with Angela Merkel, it says here she's pushing for stronger curbs on movement and contact, closing bars, restaurants, gyms, and other non-essential businesses through the end of November. France is talking about a 1-week lockdown. Germany's talking about a month-long lockdown. And then it comes as Italy and Spain impose their toughest nationwide restrictions since the end of the lockdown, while France, which has relied heavily on localized restrictions targeting the worst-hit metro areas, weighs a potential return to lockdown. Oh, I got this song. I should play for you. Lockdown. So France, and does this mean anything to you? See, it means something to me because what I see happening there has a way of showing up over here. It's kind of like the testing ground. But that doesn't answer what's going on here. See, the understanding in what would be considered modern science regarding epidemiology and sickness and health is the final word comes from the mouths of a few experts, and all the other experts who disagree are silenced. They're censored. There are so many scientists and doctors nationwide, worldwide, that have been banned from YouTube. In fact, that's, in my estimation, that's almost a sign of courage and a sign of being right when you go up against the status quo. And so a good example would be the contagion myth. Last week I was telling you should get a copy of the Contagion Myth. It's banned from Amazon. It's written by Dr. Thomas Cowan and Sally Fallon Morell. And we just bought a whole mess of these books to sell in the office. I want to get them out to my patients because I want them to have this understanding. It's extremely heavily well documented book. It's a short, small book, sells for $25. But it goes into great detail. And it was just published, of things I've been talking about for months on this radio program. And you can get it from Barnes & Noble, The Contagion Myth. So it says here, thanks to surging case numbers in the U.S. and Europe, global cases topped 44 million on Wednesday morning, according to Johns Hopkins, while global deaths numbered 1.1 million. Remember, we were supposed to have 2.2 million in this country. Come on, guys, you're not trying. And then Germany's law, it just goes on and on here. But here's some stuff that just came in this morning. Texas cases of 7,000, which is the largest daily increase in more than 2 months. Deaths of 81. Says Governor Cuomo is said to be seeking to keep 95% of the U.S. out of New York due to COVID-19 after he included California to the list of 39 states that would require quarantines. I haven't heard about that. Is that true? Governor Cuomo, just like Hawaii did, now New York is going to do this? You can't, if you are a citizen of one of the 39 states, California was just listed, would require quarantines if you were to go into New York. Elsewhere, Illinois governor announced to suspend indoor dining in Chicago beginning on Friday. See, the madness just continues here. Because they're not talking about, as I said earlier in the first hour, the infectious fatality rate, the actual death rate of seropositive people with COVID-19, as opposed to supposing that they have it. And you know all the stories out there, I can't help but believe them, that there are people dying with it, not because of it. There are people who are dying with the flu, but not because of the flu. And so what's the end game here? Well, a couple of things that come to my mind right away. Anything to make Trump look bad. And I'm not trying to make a pro or anti-Trump comment, but anything to make Trump look bad. Be prior to the election, to scare the last few people into a vote for Biden, who has already said, I'll lock down the country if that's what the scientists say. Well, what scientists? The scientists who are telling you PCR tests are safe and effective. When there's a cadre of their own colleagues who are saying that's not necessarily the case. So you hear just coronavirus cases surging here and surging. Doesn't that just scare you? Doesn't that just make you tremble and want to run to your basement and hide? That's why they do these things. So they can lead you around with that little paranoid ring in your nose. But not K-Talk listeners. We'll be right back. I did an audit of the last 50 symptom surveys that we've done. And we offer this as a free service, and we are losing money doing this. I don't know how much longer I'm going to do this. I wanted to do it as a service, as a thank you for all the business that I have had over the last 25 years as a result of my presence at K-Talk Radio. And I'm very grateful to that. I'm very grateful to Dick Perry and the management of K-Talk Radio for that very thing. I'm very grateful for the years and years and 20 years of morning, Monday through Friday talk radio and the fun that it was. Self-pronouncing as the voice of sense and sensibility. Because I don't know anybody that makes as much sense as I do. I mean, do you really? And with that having been said, I wanted to return. Mary wanted to return back some aspect of gratitude, and so we have been doing these symptom surveys. We have done literally thousands of them since we started them. Our spreadsheet just goes on and on and on and on. And it's not read by a computer. There's not an algorithm that we scan like you took a final test somewhere in a class and it gets scanned by a computer, your answer sheet. These things are gone over point by point by point. It costs money. I pay a staff, and then it takes Mary's and my time to go through these things. Now, I'm not complaining here. I'm just saying I should have been doing audits all along. But I audited the last, with Molly's help, the last 100. And we're losing money. This is not making money. Now, I'm very grateful, and I feel like I have a gift. I really do. I feel like I feel like there's a gift in my hands. Some of the just horrible conditions that we've been able to take care of in relatively quick time. And a dentist, my dentist, Mary's dentist up in Bountiful, got in touch with our office yesterday and said, listen, I've got this emergency you have got to see immediately. Please see this person. And serious neck problems. And so we made a hole to take care of them today for that very thing. And but I don't know how long I'm going to continue to do this. Now, on the homepage of ForbiddenDoctor.com, there is a place where you can sign up to take a symptom survey. I don't know that we'll continue this past another week or two without severe rethinking of what we're doing here. So if you want Mary to take a look at your symptomatic picture as addressed by a little over 200 questions, most of which do not apply to you. There's some of those questions in that 200 that definitely apply to you, and would like a free analysis of what I think, what Mary thinks, I suggest you do that promptly. All right. At ForbiddenDoctor.com. You will get a free personalized protocol and a free 30-minute conversation about the whole thing. And if I make suggestions in the way of the protocol, which I will definitely make it, I'd appreciate your getting that from me and not on Amazon. That's what keeps me in business. All right, here's a new headline. Spanish doctors stage first walkout in 25 years to protest the government's new COVID-19 order. See, it's just getting more draconian, more dictatorial, greater tyranny. And I don't want to focus on the fact that I see that coming here. I'm trying to avoid that. We don't have such autocratic control here as you do in several European countries because of their governmental systems. But the tendency to move in this direction I see in local governments that love the power that comes to them when they can make some decree to the police chief, arrest anybody or ticket anybody that's not wearing a mask, ticket anybody that's not practicing social distancing. So here I'm looking at a picture of these Spanish doctors all lined up out in front of a hospital, and I'm quoting from the article, as the coronavirus pandemic rages across Spain, where the health ministry reported another 18,000 new daily cases. We're having a lot more than that here, aren't we? Doctors are beginning the strike, which was called in defiance of Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's latest emergency order, which was implemented on Sunday. The order requires doctors and nurses to report to any of a range of assignments that could be handed to them by the government during the state of emergency, which could be in place for months. Doctors complained that the new law violated their rights. Oh, really? And compromised the standard of care for patients, as doctors would end up working in an area they weren't specialized in. Well, that happens all the time. The strike will continue indefinitely, with doctors set to continue striking on the last Tuesday of every month until a deal has been reached. Well, what kind of a strike is the last Tuesday of every month? It's just more like a bellyache. For the first time, 200,000 new cases were confirmed in Spain over the previous 2 weeks, and cases on Tuesday were up 33% compared to the prior week. And over the last 24 hours, 267 people have died. So I have my handy little calculator here, and I'm going to take a second and just talk to you while I put in 267 divided by 200,000. What? 0.001? 1/10 of 1%? Holy smoke. You better lock down the whole country for that one. That's even lower than what we're having here. Spain's hospital, here, a direct quote. The health ministry hasn't even dignified us with a meeting to try and get us to call off the strike, says Spanish health journal El Sanidad. Spain's hospitals harbor nearly 16,700 COVID-19 patients. We don't know their condition. We don't know if they're comorbidity. We don't know their age demographics. We don't know any of this stuff, like they do here in this country. Up more than 600 compared to Monday, with 1/4 of all the country's ICU units used to treat those with an infectious disease. Doctors' strikes in Spain follow a similar demonstration in India during the early months of the pandemic, as physicians dealt with unprecedented harassment from the public. Poor people. This breaks my heart. Well, again, I see things that take place in Europe as a pattern of things that could be taking place here before long. So I keep asking the question, what's this all about? What's this? Why is it worldwide? Well, because, Jack, come on. People are dying worldwide from this. Where's your humanity? Where's your empathy? Where's your so-called scientific understanding of what's going on here? Now, I have to say this disclaimer. I could be completely insane. In fact, I have extended members of my family who've described me as such because of my viewpoints on this stuff. They don't read the research. They don't go to the sources we quote. They just listen to MSNBC, CNN, Fox, and their various news reports on the pandemic. The local news television stations here, the Fox station, ABC, CBS, NBC, and some even the university broadcasts. They don't give you the real numbers. They give you the numbers that scare you, because scared people are easy to control. then you start doing psychiatric control of these people by having them dismiss their humanity by wearing masks. When there is no real, true, definitive science to promote the use of masks. Just the latest research that I looked at PubMed on masks and COVID-19, they're still using mathematical models. Mathematical models operate upon a presumption. Well, it only makes sense, Jack. If you wear a mask, you'll be safer, and the people around you will be safer. That only makes sense. In what reality does that make sense if you ignore the science that there has never been any double or placebo-controlled, double randomized crossover studies that say masks do anything? Now, it makes sense that masks in an operating room that have a different cloth material will be protecting bacterial transmissions. Sure. And you know that they, in an operating room, and I have worked in there during my undergrad down at BYU, the Utah Valley Hospital, in the operating rooms, they send an extra dose of oxygen into the operating room to compensate for the fact that these doctors, these surgeons and nurses and scrub techs and whatever else are in there are having to rebreathe their own carbon dioxide because those masks are of a different nature than these paper filter masks. So they pump a higher oxygen content into the room to make up for that. Well, I think if we were really in for a 1918 style second wave, the 1918 influenza pandemic second wave fatality overrun, we would see it in the data. But I'm not seeing it. I look through all of this stuff. And as the move towards totalitarianism, the move towards a greater control of your everyday life, the robbing of your humanity with masks, the robbing of your social contacts with social distancing so you can pretend like you're the only person in the room, the denial of the demographic groups that show, even up to my ancient age tomorrow of 70, that I'm virtually 99% survivable of this particular pandemic. You have to see what's going on here. So I'm open to all the logic and the data and the science-based objections and counterpoints to where I'm wrong, bearing in mind that, listen, Jack, just shut up and listen to the government and science really isn't a very logical or scientific or data-driven counter-argument. I need something more than that. So what should you do between now and show next Wednesday? Oh, next Wednesday will be the day after the election. Boy, that could change everything by next Wednesday. Well, do some reading exercises. You might read the Great Barrington Declaration and the points that I have issues with as to why I won't sign it. But remember, 94% of all the COVID-19 fatalities had comorbidities. And this number largely keys off of the CDC that said only 6% of fatalities list only COVID-19 as the cause of death. And if you look at the CDC's data on what comorbidities are, the biggest one accounting for close to half of all the fatalities, especially in the elderly, is pneumonia and influenza. And I think it's inaccurate to just net out all of these cases and dismiss them as comorbidities because that's one of the most common ways respiratory viruses manifest. But that said, the data, when you consider comorbidities and the looseness with which COVID gets added to the cause of death, it looked like COVID, so put it down. What this means is that the headline number of fatalities is actually really much lower than what you're being told. See you next week. The program you have just listened to is from one of my local Salt Lake City radio shows. The statements made in this podcast about specific products have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided or any information contained on or any product label or packaging or this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional.